my 5th grade. This is our last video, which means it's going to be our last couple chapters of our book, The Monsters of Morley Manor. And let's dive right in because I'm excited for you guys to see how this book ends because it ends really, really cool. So last time, we know Anthony is trapped inside the Flinduvian still, and he has started to kind of feel these memories of the Flinduvian. He's started to kind of remember what the Flinduvian kind of went through when he was younger, and he's starting to get a better understanding of why the Flinduvians are the way that they are and kind of who they are as people. And it's kind of really cool to see from kind of a different perspective and a different side of things. And then right at the very end, he started to hear some voices in his head, and we find out that Martin, who we thought had betrayed us, is kind of starting to now try and talk to Anthony. So we have to kind of figure out what's going on here because we thought Martin was a bad guy and led the Flinduvians to us. But now it seems as though Martin is trying to help Anthony. So we're going to have to figure out exactly what's going on here. So let's dive right back in. Chapter 22, Martin's Story. Martin, I thought in astonishment. As in Gaspar's brother? As in the kid that the Flinduvians brought back with them? No, Martin, the next-door neighbor's dog. Of course I'm Gaspar's brother. But how did you get in here, into this body? The Flinduvians have put me in and pulled me out of more bodies than I can count. After a while, I learned to do it on my own, though I never let them know I could do it. Now, are you going to waste my time with stupid questions, or shall we figure out a way to solve this mess? You got any suggestions, I thought, hoping that didn't qualify as a stupid question. Martin sighed. Unfortunately, no. But now that I've managed to get in contact with you, at least we'll be in better shape if an opportunity does arise. That was fine with me. It was the first glimmer of hope I'd had since the Flinduvians showed up. But I was still curious. So, despite the crack about stupid questions, I tried another. I don't get it. Whose side are you on? Ours or the Flinduvians? My own, he replied sharply. Care to explain that? I asked. Depends on how much time we have, he answered. Let me go check. I didn't feel him go, but I guess he must have, because suddenly he said, All right, it looks like everything is quiet out there. Don't they notice when you leave your body? I asked. Actually, it's possible they could, and that's a danger. But I've just been sitting in a corner looking sullen, and no one is paying much attention to me. Even if they do glance my way, it just appears that I'm resting my head on my arms. Now, let me fill you in on some of the details of what's happening. Here's his story. A couple of points I figured out later, but for the most part, this is what he said. When I first fell through the worlds into Flinduvia, I was nearly as pleased as I was terrified. At last, it seemed my quest for greater knowledge of the worlds beyond ours was to be rewarded. Little did I know that the reward would carry on with its own punishment. But that was the case, for in stumbling into Flinduvia, I had entered a place that was as close to a living hell as you would ever find. Given what I had learned about Flinduvia from being trapped in the alien body, I had no trouble believing this. When I tumbled out of our world, there was a Flinduvian waiting to snatch me up. They had detected a reckless experiments of Gaspar and I were conducting, and had created a kind of trap, hoping we would stumble into it. It took very little time for them to make a copy of me and send it back to Earth. Not a clone. The clones came later. This was a quick copy job, little more than an animated puppet to hold my place. Within a few days, it was replaced by a more sophisticated copy, and a few weeks later, another. Finally, they had a perfect clone of me, which they programmed as they wished, then sent off as my final replacement. It studied both my family and our world, sending back information to its masters. But because they had a need to make it believable, the clone had a combination of human and Flinduvian characteristics, which is one reason that it shared some of the great secrets with my family, such as the starry doors. The Flinduvians were unhappy about that, partly because if it had been discovered that they had let the secret out to a planet not part of the coalition of civilized worlds, the punishment would have been swift and secure. But they felt the risk was worth the possible gain. Meanwhile, I was being held prisoner, or perhaps it would be more accurate to say I was kept as an experimental lab animal. I was poked, prodded, and analyzed as completely and impersonally as if I were some important new species of insect. Yet, after a time, some of them began to talk to me, to tell me about things. I got the feeling they looked on me as we might look on a particularly intelligent pet, someone who you share your troubles with. Certainly a Flinduvian would never share his troubles or doubts with another one of his own species. That would be seen as weakness, which is the most dangerous trait you can display in their society. Now, time in Flinduvia flows differently than it does here, about a ratio of 3 to 1. That's one reason they were able to send back the first copy in what seemed like such a short time to Gaspar. For every minute that passes here, 3 minutes go by in Flinduvia, which means that I, myself, have been here for the equivalent of over 200 years. There was such a weariness and sorrow in that statement that it nearly broke my heart, but it also confused me. If you've been there so long, how come you still look like you're only 12? Because this was the body the Flinduvians thought would work best as bait when the Wentar and the others showed up. Besides, even though I have several different ages, physically speaking, during my time in Flinduvia, they liked keeping me as they had first captured me. I think it was a symbol as their first step towards the conquest they had dreamed of. Anyway, as the years rolled on, as the first century moved into the second, I earned more and more privileges from the scientists who guarded and studied me. One of those was the ability to occasionally don other versions of my body. I could be myself as I would appear at 20 or 30 or 40 and so on. They kept dozens of copies of me in their lab, and with their technology it was not that hard to move from one to another, which is how I was able to come back to Earth when I had discovered they had called home the clone that had been taking my place here. They knew I hated being the old man version of my body, so they didn't put many safeguards on them. Late one night I slipped into one of those bodies. Then, through the starry door that leads to this house, I was horrified to discover that the contents were being sold. I had only a little time before I would be missed in Flinduvia. I didn't want to take my family back there, but I had to make sure they were taken out of the house before the place was destroyed. That's why I showed your sister the box where my clone had placed my frozen, shrunken family so long ago. How did you know about that? I asked him. The Flinduvians told me, the fools, because they have no family bonds at all, and because they knew I had many conflicts with my brother and sisters. My captors simply assumed that what they had done to my family wouldn't make that much difference to me. They actually thought it might amuse me. His voice grew scornful. Vile Flinduvians, they did not understand the ties that bind the family Morley. Blinded by their own cruelty, they would never guess the bonds of blood and loyalty I share with my brother and sisters, no matter how much I might have fought with them, nor could they ever begin to realize how deeply I desired to free my family, how I would plot for a decade after decade to release them. He was silent for a moment, and I got the sense he was brooding about his centuries on Flinduvia. I tried to put myself in his place, imagining what it was like. The idea gave me cold shivers. Finally, he spoke again. Now, here's what you need to know, Anthony. The key to the entire Flinduvian plan is secrecy. If word of what they were up to gets back to the High Council of the Coalition of Civilized Worlds, the Coalition's massed forces would clamp down on the Flinduvians faster than a mousetrap snapping shut. The Council is suspicious, but this is high diplomacy, and there are delicate rules to be followed. To have any chance of success, the Flinduvians must have their conquest well underway before anyone realizes what's going on. So all we need to do is break up the situation long enough for the Wentar to get back to his homeworld and pass on this information. It would be nice if we got out of this alive, but given what's at stake, living through it is really a side issue. Are you telling me that the fate of the civilized galaxy rests in our hands? I asked. I'd say that's an accurate statement of the situation, Martin replied. But then, wait, let's listen. An argument had broken out among the Flinduvians. Actually, the regular conversation could be considered arguments, so this was something bigger. We should not wait for Jevero, shouted one of the warriors who had not spoken before. Let's kill them now and be done with it. Who is in command here, Frax? Shouted Dice Rock. The question is, who should be in command, replied Frax, giving Dice Rock a shove. Martin must have sensed my astonishment that a soldier would shove his leader, because he said, They're like this all the time. A position of power is yours for no longer than you can hold it. They shift. Uh-oh. Frax, getting louder and angrier, had shoved his way past Dice Rock. We'll start with the old lady, he said, just for fun. I could smell him moving towards my grandmother. In vain, I ordered my body to act, struggling desperately to lift an arm, take a step. No luck. I stood as if frozen. My little sister has no such problem. You leave my grandma alone, Sarah screamed. I could smell her fear and her anger, which was at least as strong. I smelled her leaping over to stand in front of Grandma. You'll do just as well for starters, roared Frax, snatching her off the floor. Sarah's scream filled the room. Chapter 23. The Red Haze. That was it. Sarah may be a total pain in the butt sister, but she was my pain in the butt, and I didn't intend to let any stinking alien turn her into Sister Sushi. Let her go, you damn Flinduvian, I screamed. At the same time, my eyes snapped open, a haze of red coloring my vision, and I could feel myself taking control of the body at last. Bellowing with rage, I charged forward. Zarok, stop, commanded Dice Rock. I laughed, as if I was going to stop simply because he told me to. I was a creature of fierce power and furious anger. The red haze had me, and no mere order would stop my onslaught. Dice Rock fiddled with the control box, twisting the knob, shaking the box, shaking it harder, finally flinging it to the floor so fiercely that it burst into pieces. I reached out with my fist and smashed him in the face as I went past. He fell with a thud. The red haze grew brighter. The alien who had picked up Sarah looked at me in fear and astonishment. You put her down, I roared, the words coming out in the harsh language of Flinduvia. Somewhere in my head I could hear Martin laughing. The Flinduvian dropped Sarah. Immediately, Ludmilla and Millicent swooped in and snatched her away from the battle. And a battle it was. The Flinduvian I had challenged had started to pummel me. I didn't care. My blood was like fire. I was in a frenzy, a creature of the red haze, a roaring, shrieking, fighting machine. 2 other aliens jumped me from behind. I tried to shake them off, but they clamped on me and dragged me to the floor. Then suddenly, complete chaos erupted in the room. It took me a moment to realize what had happened. Gaspar, sensing the moment was right, did what he had not a chance to do before. Digging into his pocket, he pulled out the sonic disruptor the Wentar had given him back on the planet of the frogs. He flung the silvery disc to the floor. It exploded in a cloud of smoke that gave off bright flashes of color. As each flash burst, it emitted a high squeal that seemed to go right through my head. It must have been pitched to some note that was particularly excruciating to the Flinduvians, because all of them, me included, slammed their hands to their ears and began to howl. The humans in the room looked at us in astonishment, as if they couldn't figure out what we were doing. The pain was incredible, so intense and debilitating that I suspect it came from more than just the sound. But Flinduvian warriors are trained to ignore pain, so the sonic disruptor proved to be no more than what the Wentar had said it would be, a distraction. The other aliens were the first to move against it, staggering, groaning. They began to lurch toward the device with the intention of breaking it, I suppose. I wasn't used to dealing with such pain. I wasn't used to maneuvering this body. But I had one thing in my favor. The Flinduvians were mere soldiers. I was a brother, grandson, and friend. They were fighting because it is what they did. I was fighting because I had to save the people I loved. I had one more thing in my favor. Martin. He was inside my head, cheering me on. "This isn't your body, Anthony," he cried. "Who cares what happens to it? The pain will end. All that matters is who wins the fight." With a roar, I threw myself forward, heading for the device myself. The pain was phenomenal, pulsing through my Flinduvian skull like razors or fire coated with acid. But the red haze was stronger. I pushed through the wall of agony, screaming and howling in a voice that scared even me. It was like trying to force yourself upstream through a river of burning molasses. I could see the other Flinduvians, each moving slowly towards the disruptor, ready to smash it if it was the last thing they ever did. I had to get there first, to keep the advantage. I pushed ahead, pushed faster. "Xarox, I command you to stop," screamed Rock. He was crawling across the floor from the other direction. Frax, the soldier who he had been arguing with, stepped on his head, a gesture of contempt for his failure, I guess. One of the Flinduvians grabbed my arm. I spun and slammed him so viciously it sent him sprawling across the room. Astonished at my own strength, I forged onward. I was about to snatch the disruptor from the floor and turn it towards the others, drive them out of the room, when two Flinduvians tackled me. I hit the floor with a crash that shook the walls. All the Flinduvians were roaring and screaming. The smell of their rage, their fear, their hate burned in my alien nostrils, filling the real me with horror. Yet, at the same time, it seemed to give added power to the alien body. The red haze still clouded my vision. With a roar, I picked up one of the Flinduvians who had tackled me and smashed him against the other. Both fell unconscious. I started crawling towards the disruptor again. The closer I got, the more I felt as if my head was going to explode. "What if it explodes?" Martin screamed through blazing pain. "It's not your head. Keep going, keep going." I had almost reached the device when one of the Flinduvians grabbed my feet. I tried to pull myself forward, but it was hard to move toward so much pain. Hard when the enemy was trying to pull me away from it, and each inch I slid backward offered a shred of blessed relief. Suddenly, I heard a vicious snarling and snapping. Bob, sweet little Cocker Spaniel Bob, had attacked the Flinduvian holding my foot. The alien shouted in anger. He didn't let go, but the attack distracted him enough for me to shake myself free. I pulled myself another few inches closer to the Wentar's silvery disk. Now I realized the others had thrown themselves into the battle. Albert was leaping around the room, bounding against the staggering aliens, trying to keep them from reaching me. I saw him scramble onto a table, launch himself into the air, and then land on a Flinduvian's back. "Yahoo!" he cried, covering his bulging eyes with his hands. "Just like the old days, huh, boss?" Gaspar didn't answer. He was too busy pounding on the head of one of the aliens. He was perched on its back and had its legs wrapped around its waist. "Vile disruptor of families," he snarled, giving the Flinduvian another jolting blow. "Now, does the family Morleskevich take its revenge?" Not far past him, Melisande and Ludmilla were holding another Flinduvian by the legs. Every time the alien reached for one of the sisters, the other one would distract him. Grandma was hitting him on the head with her shoe. But the strangest sight of all is the mad melee that was my own human body, powered by Grandpa, side by side with Sarah. It was pushing one of the monsters away from the desk, away from me. No human could stand against a Flinduvian in its full strength, of course, but the Wentar's sonic disruptor, with its agonizing sounds keyed to Flinduvian ears, had weakened our enemies enough for my friends and family to hold them back. Even so, they were risking their lives to do it. I couldn't let them down. With a last surge of strength, I lunged forward and grabbed the sonic disruptor. I staggered to my feet. The Flinduvians howled in rage, feeling as if 1,000 bombs were exploding in my brain. I pointed the device at them and began to herd them toward one side of the room. "Well done," cried Martin. "Well done, Anthony." "Watch out!" cried Grandpa from my body's mouth. I turned, just in time to see one of the Flinduvians lunging toward me. I kicked savagely, catching him in the jaw and sending him reeling back against the wall. "Enough," said the Wentar, stepping forward. "Enough. It is finished." Gently, he took the sonic disruptor from my hands. Pain overwhelmed me. I collapsed to the floor and into a well of blackness. Chapter 24. Martin's Choice. When I opened my eyes, my friends and family were staring down at me. I did a quick check. If I had had a heart, it would have sunk. I was still in the Flinduvian body. "Horace, are you all right in there?" asked Grandma. "That's not Horace, darling," said my grandfather, who was standing next to her, still wrapped in my body. "It's Anthony." "If that's Anthony, then who are you?" cried Sarah, looking at my body nervously. "I'm your grandfather," he said, sounding slightly embarrassed. Sarah's eyes got wide. "That is too weird," she said, backing away from him. "I don't understand," said Grandma, her voice quavering. She looked as if she was about to cry. "I don't understand any of this." "I'm sorry, Ethel," said Grandpa gently. "When these monsters snatched Anthony out of his body instead of me, it seemed best not to say anything. I figured anything they didn't know might be helpful to us later on." "A wise choice," said the Wentar. "Information is always a useful tool. I suspect the reason Anthony was able to seize control of the Flinduvian body was that he is a living spirit, not a dead one. Your silence may well have provided the element of surprise we needed to overcome them." "So you weren't planning on keeping my body?" I asked. "Of course not," said Grandpa. He sounded indignant, but my face had just enough of blush on it that I suspected the idea had crossed his mind. "Oh well, if the situation was reversed, I probably would have considered it too. It's what you do that counts, not what you think about doing, thank goodness. So how do we get me out of this thing?" I asked, looking down at my horrible alien body. "I'm not sure," said the Wentar, sounding uncomfortable. "Could you use the Flinduvian collecting gun?" asked Sarah. "If it put him in there, shouldn't it be able to pull him out?" "It's worth a try," said the Wentar, his long face looking gloomy. "What happened to the Flinduvians anyway?" I asked. My head was still throbbing, and it was hard for me to concentrate. "The Wentar called for assistance while you were sleeping," said Ludmilla, sounding very satisfied. "The group that was here was hauled away. I hope they will receive terrible justice." Once I had proof of their plans, it was easy to get the coalition of civilized worlds to slap a quarantine on their planet, said the Wentar. I had long suspected that they were plotting something, but it was impossible to act without evidence. They will not be a menace again for a very long time. "Here's the gun," said Albert, clumping back over to join us. "Who wants to try?" "I will," said Martin. "I know their technology best." He pointed the collecting gun at my head. I flinched. On the other hand, I couldn't wait to get out of that horrible body. "Ready?" asked Martin. I nodded. He pulled the trigger. A surge of energy surrounded me. Everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was still trapped inside the Flinduvian. "What happened?" I cried in horror. "Nothing," whispered Melisande, lowering her head in sorrow. "Nothing at all." "I believe I know the source of the problem," said the Wentar. "What?" I cried. "What is it?" "When you went into the red haze, you meshed yourself with the Flinduvian body in a deep way. You were not merely inhabiting it, not merely providing it with energy. You were living in it, in a way that it was accustomed to. Now, it doesn't want to let go of you." "Does that mean I have to spend the rest of my life as a Flinduvian?" I asked in horror. No one answered. No one looked happy. "Maybe I could take his place," suggested Grandpa. Grandma gasped, but I didn't say anything. "It might work," said the Wentar, "but it would be a bad idea. If I'm correct, the reason Anthony could seize control of the body is that his spirit was still living one. You would have no such advantage. It's more likely you would end up a mindless slave, as the Flinduvians had intended." "Oh, that's right," said Grandpa. "I was married for nearly... Oh, that's all right," said Grandpa. "I was married for nearly 50 years. "Horace!" cried Grandma in a shocked voice. "Just joking," he said softly, and I could tell that the point of his joke had been to hold back his own horror. at what he might have to do to free me. I felt guilty for having doubted him before. I think I have a better idea, said Martin. I will take over the body. I'm already used to switching bodies since the Flinduvians moved me from clone to clone more times than I can count. The others started to question him, but he raised his hand. Turning to the Wentar, he said, "It would be a good idea, would it not, to have a spy among the Flinduvians, someone who could pass undetected in case they decide to act up again?" "I suspect it would," said the Wentar uneasily. "Then it might as well be me." Melisande started to cry. Martin actually smiled. "Don't be sad, sister dearest," he said gently. "I have been too long gone from this world to ever fit in here comfortably again. Horrible as Flanduvia is, I belong there now. As I told you while Anthony was sleeping, it's been well over 2 centuries by their time, nearly 20 times as long as I lived on this world. Besides," he said, smiling wickedly, "I have some scores to settle there." And so it was decided. It wasn't easy. Before we even started, Gaspar and Martin went apart from the rest of us. They sat and talked for a long time. I wondered what it was like for them, to have been twins, to have lost each other, for Gaspar to have lived with a clone of Martin, for Martin to have lived more than 2 centuries in another world. What could they say to each other now? I tried not to be impatient while they talked, but I ached to be free of the Flinduvian body, and feared that if we waited too long it might not be possible. At last they came back, looking sad but settled. Gaspar, so much bigger and older, and yet in truth so much younger than his twin, had his hand on Martin's shoulder. They nodded at each other. Then Martin's body slumped, and I felt him come back into the Flinduvian body. Slowly, bit by bit, he replaced my spirit with his. It took hours, the longest, most painful and horrifying hours that I have ever known. When he was finally done, we said in one voice, "All right, try the gun again." The Wentar pointed it at our head and pulled the trigger. Once more the energy engulfed me, but this time it was different. This time I could feel myself being wrenched from the body, pulled back into the collecting jar. My panic was brief. It was a matter of but moments to put me back in my own body. "Welcome home, Anthony," said my grandfather. His voice was kind, gentle, and just a little bit sad. "You did a good job, kiddo." We talked for a little while, probably the most private conversation anyone has ever had. Then he disappeared from my body. I saw his shape floating before me, looking the way it had in the land of the dead. He drifted over to my grandmother, stroking her cheek, though not really, of course, since touch is only for the living. He whispered, "I love you so much, my darling. Be happy. When the time is right, I'll see you on the other side." He blew a kiss to Sarah, then made a salute to the others. Turning back to me, he mouthed the word, "Remember." Then he gave me a wink and faded out of sight. Now here's for the epilogue. Technically, this is not a chapter. It's kind of a wrap-up that a lot of books use at the end. So what we just read is technically the end of the book. Now we are going to read the epilogue, which gives us a little insight to kind of what happens after the end of the book. So, epilogue. It's been a year now since Sarah and I met the monsters of Morley Manor, and a lot of things have changed. Morley Manor is one of them. Gaspar managed to prove that he was the rightful heir, and once the legal battle was finished, it took until late spring, he and Albert began working on restoring the mansion to its former glory. Ludmilla and Melisande spent most of their time in Zenterzana these days, but they are often guests at the old house. Sometimes when they come to visit, Gaspar will have a dinner party, to which he invites Sarah, Grandma Walker, and me. Every once in a while, the sisters will have some strange new look. The first time, they actually had to tell us who they were, which I seem to find hilarious. But usually they're in their familiar bodies, Melisande with her snaky hair and Ludmilla with her vampire fangs. Mom and Dad don't quite understand our connection to Morley Manor. That's all right. As I tell them almost every day, the world is too vast and too strange for any of us to understand all of it. "You've changed this past year, Anthony," Mom says sometimes. "You're growing up." Maybe. She seems to say that mostly when I'm helping out at the flower shop, but I've got a reason for that. It was something Grandpa said to me during that last conversation. What he told me to remember. It didn't sink in completely at the time. There was too much going on, and I was still pretty rattled. But it keeps coming back to me. I suspect he etched it in my brain somehow, leaving it as a little present for me, because I can still hear him say it, as if he was inside my head even now, instead of where he is. "Anthony, all your life people are going to tell you to stop and smell the roses, but they won't usually tell you why. So let me give you one good reason. The one I learned too late. There are no gardens in the land of the dead. You have to embrace life now, Anthony. Now, while you're still part of it. Grab it to you. See it, feel it, hold it, love it. Don't let it pass you by, boy. Don't shut yourself off from it. Because the truth is, you never know what moment is going to be your last. What scent, what sound, what smell will be the last one you experience. Make it good. Make it real." Probably pretty good advice coming from a dead man. So I spend more time at the flower shop than I used to. I like helping Mom and Dad. Besides, you never know which rose will be your last. I also spend a lot of time at Morley Manor, working with Gaspar in his strange laboratory, with its mad mix of magic and science, trying, as he says, to plumb the mysteries of the universe. I don't suppose we'll ever manage to know it all. On the other hand, I know a few more things than I used to, like what it means to have a family that loves you. We should all be so lucky. All right. Well, that's the end of the book, guys. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you enjoyed reading it, and I hope you like how it ended. Thank you guys for staying with me the whole time. I know this was a lot of videos and a lot of listening, but I hope you guys all enjoyed it, and I will see you guys later.